Hello and welcome back to another Rush Duel Links deck profile. Today we're taking a look at the machine good stuff list that we've been seeing going around. We did see World's competitor Parco win a tournament with this list. We have also seen it cropping up here and there in ladders, in some tournaments and in some point battles, so we thought we would give it a spin. But we'll take a look at the skill first because this is a very interesting skill. This is JOINTECH Charge. So when we say this is interesting, it's interesting that this is seeing much play at all since the skill most of the time doesn't really do anything. So what does it do? It can be activated during a turn that you have normal summoned JOINTECH Rex. So we can't special summon it. We have to summon exactly Rex. We can send a Carpendra and a Craft Roll from outside of our deck to the graveyard. So we normal summon Rex. We then put a level 4 1400 vanilla in the graveyard. And we put a level 3 1100 vanilla in the graveyard. So the reason we want to put these cards in the graveyard is to fulfill effect requirements such as Rex, which shuffle cards back into our deck. And we do have quite a lot, and we have quite a lot that do specifically require machines, which means this does actually work quite well. Now, assuming the deck is doing what it's supposed to be doing, this isn't actually super relevant, but this can come in clutch in some situations, especially since there are quite a few cards in the deck that need to shuffle multiple cards back in. So if we don't have a wealth of them in the graveyard, we can sometimes not use all of our effects, which can cause some issues. So I guess we'll go through the card by card and start off with Ancient Gear Golem. This card is just absolutely incredible. It is without a doubt the best legend monster that basically in the game right now. This card can just win games on its own. It is just that good. 3000 attack, 3000 defense, legend, earth, machine, cannot be special summoned, which, you know, that does kind of suck. It means we can't summon off of Essel, but other than that, doesn't really matter. And then this card inflicts piercing battle damage and your opponent cannot activate trap cards. Piercing is the really big thing with this because piercing is always really, really powerful in Rush. It also has 3000 defense, which can make it difficult for some decks to get over. 3000 attack also is relevant because there are a lot of decks right now that can change your battle position, thinking like Metarion and Vitristar, and we're thinking about things like Light Galaxy with Meteor Charge. They can keep changing our battle positions. So having 3000 attack and defense does make it quite difficult to beat over outside of some like very specific cases. So Gear Golem, just absolutely fantastic, as well as the fact it turns off back row, which is so important. We can easily close out games. If your opponent has like 2000 life points left, a couple of set monsters, we can just slam down the Gear Golem. Unless they have a trap hole, we know we're ending the game. Then there's the 2 copies of JOINTECH Rex, and JOINTECH Rex is pretty cool. This is a card that did see a ton of play over in the OCG, but has not seen anywhere near as much play in Duel Links. And the reason for that primarily is that we are down to 30 card decks. In the OCG, we would typically play somewhere between 6 and 8 boss monsters. So quite often you'd have 2 primary bosses that you'd have 3 copies of each. And then you kind of have this extra little place where you're like, I kind of want to play an extra boss, but there's nothing that really fits in the deck. So JOINTECH Rex would be that extra card. Having a basically generic back row pop is just really, really good. So what does it do? During the turn that you normal summon this card, shuffle 3 monsters from your graveyard into the deck. Now, notably, this isn't machines, this is any monsters, which is what makes this generic. But then we can destroy 1 card in your opponent's spell and trap card zone. So popping a back row again, really, really good. We'll basically be recycling this a whole bunch by keep shuffling it back into our deck, using all of the myriad of different effects in our deck that do this, so we'll be using this quite a lot. This card does have 2 kind of big negatives though. First off, 1500 defense is very low, and we just did speak about all the ways that decks currently have in the current meta to change battle positions, which means Rex is a bit of a liability. He will just kind of die. And you only get the effect the turn it's summoned, and it has to have been normal summoned. So if we do summon it off of Essel, we will not get that effect. So that's kind of 1 card that can't be summoned off of Essel and 2 cards that don't really want to be summoned off of Essel. Does complicate this a little bit, but Rex is still a really good card. It still just turns on our skill to throw extra cards in the graveyard, and popping back row is still really good. And then we have Innovator. He's not going anywhere. Innovator will probably continue to be meta just at all times unless something else happens. So when we say he's meta, he's not in the best 3 decks, right? If I was to place the machine good stuff list, this is like, I don't know, mid tier 3. Like, it's not a super strong deck, but it is okay. And by that measure, Innovator is also really good in here. It is the heart and soul of all machine decks. Being able to boost its attack up to being over 4000 can be absolutely ridiculous, so it can out just about anything. And getting that pre-built in piercing is really, really strong, as well as we can just use it to recycle cards back into our deck, which is what this deck wants to be doing anyway. So it just works on all angles. It's just such a perfect card for this build. Then we have Essel, and once again, Essel, just a fantastic card. We want cards in the graveyard because we have several cards that do shuffle cards back in. Rex needs 3, Mirror Innovator needs between 1 and 3, so we want to have tons and tons of cards in the graveyard anyway, so milling is great. And if we do get to cheat out, ideally an Innovator on turn 2, that is just icing on the cake. It is just such a powerful card in this deck. And it's nice that it does have the 1000 attack and defense, because that does help it somewhat play around like Galaxy, which is always a bonus. Then we have Rhythmical Performer. Send the top card of the deck to the graveyard. Your opponent sends the top card of their deck to the graveyard. Then if they send a spell trap, we can draw 1 card. So in this meta specifically, Metarion does exist. And Metarion tends to play around 14 to 16 spell traps, which means this effect is a lot more likely to come off. But not only that, we also have Light Galaxy in this meta that also likes to play a lot of spell traps. Typically, they're playing something like 11 or 12. And even beyond that, Cyber Dragon, at least some lists, have taken to playing 10 plus spell traps in their lists as well, which means Rhythmical Performer is kind of in a good spot right now in the meta. The big downside of Rhythmical is its stats are a bit low at 500 attack, 900 defense, which means you can get a bit bullied by Light Galaxy, so that is something to take note of. But getting a free plus off of this is always going to be really, really good. Getting a free plus in general is absolutely fantastic, because the idea is we'd summon it, use it, get a draw ideally, and then just tribute off to get out any of our boss monsters. So Rhythmical Performer, absolutely fantastic. Then we have Boltracorn, and Boltracorn is, again, it's a perfect card for a good stuff list, and it's a machine, so it works with everything else. Being able to turn off your opponent's back row can be really, really good. I mean, if you take a look, we are playing 3 Barrage of Steel, we're playing the Ultimate Flag Beast Boltracorn, and 2 copies of Rex, which means we have so many ways to deal with our opponent's back row that it's a little bit silly. Then we have Surge Bicorn. Now, Surge Bicorn is a bit awkward because we can only get out Innovator with it. But this is another way to basically get a discount so we can get out Innovator cheaper, as well as another way to shuffle cards back into our deck. So it's still really, really good in here. And we should be recycling our Innovators constantly, so we'll have extra copies to keep drawing into. So Surge Bicorn should be live most of the time anyway. Then we have Aim Eagle. Now, Aim Eagle in this meta is a bit awkward because it does only have the 200 attack and defense, which means it is going to absolutely get destroyed by Light Galaxy, and we'll be taking a metric ton of damage. But sometimes getting the extra 1000 can be really relevant. In fact, today we played this in a tournament, and we did play against Yami Ruler, who stopped us from tributing, but because we had Aim Eagle, we were able to cheat out our Innovator anyway, which was very, very good. So Aim Eagle, a little bit shaky, but in the right situation, absolutely incredible. Then we have the Imaginary Reactor, and these are in here. Again, milling is good. It is also a machine, so it does work with a lot of other cards. And we also have the Monster Reincarnation, so occasionally this will be a Pot of Greed. Imaginary Reactor is just absolutely insane. We're basically playing Performer for the chance to get a +1, so why wouldn't we go for an almost guaranteed +2? +2 in Rush, especially at this stage of the game, is actually insane. That is such ridiculous value. So because of that, I don't see why we wouldn't be playing Reactor in any deck that we possibly could. And then there's Craft the Drone. Again, 0 defense is a little bit shaky with all the piercing running around, but this can fix our hand. There have been a couple of situations where we've drawn several boss monsters, and we have been able to fix our hand using Craft the Drone, which will just let us draw into a more playable hand. Also, we can use this to get rid of our other lower level monsters if we have no bosses. If we're in a situation where we're going to be dead anyway, we might as well gamble on the drone rather than just accepting defeat. The drone is still pretty cool. So for our legend spell, Monster Reincarnation. So primarily, this is in here because it works with Reactor, but it is also fantastic for bringing back Ancient Gear Golem, JOINTECH Rex, or Mirror Innovator from the graveyard. If we are bricked in a very specific way, we could also bring back something like a Surge Bicorn to actually get one of our bosses out. If we're, for example, bricked entirely on bosses or just spell traps and bosses. So this card is still really good, and it's sort of versatile. It's not super versatile, but we can use this in at least more than one way, so it can be a bit more versatile than some other legend cards. Then we have the Barrage of Steel, again popping back row. This deck really wants to just deal with all your opponent's back row so we can just keep attacking in, so makes sense. Then we have Widespread Ruin. Widespread Ruin is fantastic into exactly Metarion. It is also pretty good into Cyber Dragon, but it is really bad typically, not all the time, but typically into Light Galaxy. So Widespread Ruin is a bit of a meta call. In this deck, it makes more sense because we're playing the 2 Aim Eagle anyway, so we're not going to be playing the negate attack, so Widespread Ruin makes sense. But if we're expecting to be in a meta that is very Galaxy heavy, it might make sense to replace this with negate attack, replace an Aim Eagle, and maybe put in, instead of this Thunderspark that we have, possibly the inclusion of Slime just to help out with that Galaxy matchup. But Thunderspark is also pretty good. Using this, we could basically have our Innovators or our Rex trade with Metarion fusion monsters. So there are quite a few situations where Thunderspark actually is very, very strong. This isn't always live. This card sometimes can feel like a bit of a liability. What we were actually using this for most of the time, so we let our opponent attack into us, they'll see there's a delay, and then they'll think this is either a Legend Trap or a Slime. So then they'll start playing around that, they'll maybe start trying to pop it, and they won't go like super all in until they've popped the back row, only to find out it was Thunderspark, which has then bought us some extra time. So that's kind of the primary way we've been using this. But if we can use this to kill one of our opponent's monsters when they attack into us, it is just insane value. The extra deck here is completely irrelevant, we've just stuck in a load of Chronicles because why not? But this is the deck, and how does the deck play? The deck feels actually pretty good. Now the deck can get a little bit bricky. We did have a few games where we didn't find any boss monsters, and we just had a bunch of normal summons and we couldn't really do anything. We've also had a few games where we found all of the boss monsters and no low levels, and haven't really been able to do anything. So that will just happen, but that is kind of rushed to a T. Now there are some decks that are better at dealing with situations like that. This deck, again, we can use Bicorn to fix, we can use Craft the Drone to fix. There are ways to deal with it, but sometimes they just won't work. Sometimes they will work out just fine. So I will say, if you're very risk averse and you don't really like bricking and your objective is to brick as little as possible, this might not be the deck for you. But if you want a relatively versatile deck, maybe this is going to be for you. So why is this deck kind of versatile? So we can pop back row in a lot of ways. We also have multiple ways to gain Piercing between Ancient Gear Golem and the 3 copies of Innovator. By having access to Piercing, that now means we don't have to play into Metarion's OTK combo. We can just sit there with one monster face up and basically try to play around it that way. Now this won't always protect you from just dying to Metarion, but it will protect you very specifically from the Ashura Star Type Change Beam combo where they'll absorb all your attack and OTK you. So this deck can at least do that. So we can choose to go aggressive by having a bunch of monsters face up and pushing in, or we can choose to play the kind of slower control style game by just having one face up monster with Piercing, which depending on the situation can win you games, but also could get punished depending on the game state. So you really have to pay attention to the matchup and the way the game is going to really make a judgment call at the time. But let's fire in some replays so I can show you what I've been talking about